that leads to my number one goal. The one thing that matters more than anything to me about this book is that food aversion is okay. It's not a defect. It doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make you a bad person or a bad child or anything. It's not a judgment. It's okay.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is Food Aversion and Picky Eating with Chef Matthew Broberg-Moffitt. Matthew is a classically trained chef, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators member, former substance abuse counselor, erstwhile computer repair tech, and one-time Buddhist monk. Matthew is the author of their new book, Color, Taste, Texture, Recipes for Picky Eaters, Those with Food Aversion, and Anyone Who's Ever Cringed at Food. Matthew, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Hi, Dr. Dan. Hi, everybody.
Hello. All right. So I know we have a lot to talk about in terms of food and everything related with all of us picky eaters and those we know. But first, I have to ask about the road to Buddhist monk.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had actually adopted Buddhism when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a point in my life in my late 20s where I was looking for something more.
Mm-hmm.
And also I've always wanted to be a monk. I've spent time and at the Omaha Temple doing zazen and stuff like that, and learned about Zen Mountain Monastery, and you spent about 4 months there. So that's about. It was pretty remarkable. I definitely learned more about myself during that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do your practices stay with you? The practices stay with you to this day?
They do. I still practice my sitting meditations and mindfulness and being more cognizant of what's going on internally and externally. So
wonderful. May we all ascribe to that.
Yeah.
So neurodiversity.
Yes.
I'm wondering about if there's any intersection in hindsight about your path of understanding your own neurodiversity and your quest for something more that led you to Buddhism.
Absolutely. I mean, especially as a child, when I first started reading about it, I mean, I was a voracious reader. I even when I was very young, I read about 2,000 words a minute, and so I read literally anything I could get my hands on. And I actually, it was the I can't even remember what brought me into it. I think it was AOL was like becoming very popular and had online internet access and unfettered information, and that that was the straw that, I don't know, enlightened the camel's back, I suppose.
Oh, nice. And all of us as parents now, with the open format of the internet, we all wish our kids were seeking answers through philosophy, and it doesn't always go that way these days with all the stuff that's at everyone's
No,
fingertips. Yes.
I mean, we're very much, prone to pleasure seeking, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're younger, and it's much more, you know, common that people go the route of distraction and enjoyment rather than, you know, actually seeking the answers that might pain them,
Mm-hmm.
especially at a younger age.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a very active in my church community before then. By my own desire, I actually would hitch rides with other. I was in a Baptist church, and I went 3 days a week at my own urging. Um,
Mm-hmm.
one of my earliest careers I wanted to be was a priest or a holy person. I think that my predilection for trying to learn. I mean, I taught myself to read when I was 3,
Mm-hmm.
with a copy of Stephen King's *The Eyes of the Dragon*. That was
Mm-hmm.
low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Because my mother obviously didn't think she needed to keep the book,
Right.
out of reach, which was the second book I read at the age of 3, which kind of explains some things. If you,
Did you understand all of that? And
I did.
were you afraid?
I was. I
Yeah.
was. I understood, and I was afraid. I had a very tumultuous childhood with. We had a lot of homelessness, and
Mm,
there was a lot of abuse in the home, and so even though it was scary, it wasn't actually as scary as some of the things I was already experiencing.
mm.
And I think partly that was the desire. At least I knew in a book that it would end.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, not to be too
Mm,
deep there, but that
yeah.
was
Yeah. Well, and that knowing that at a young age, I don't know. I sense I could see the seeking, the wanting more, the knowledge, and the you were ahead of your years in many ways. And I think from what I've learned about you as you got older, you were trying to reconcile the being ahead in many ways from your peers, and then in other areas where you maybe felt you weren't
right
fitting or keeping up or understanding.
there, and there were so many of those. I mean, I had been in a relationship of one sort or another since I was 17. So it was kind of when I was as an adult, it was a lot of. I knew there were areas where I couldn't understand people. I mean, I went back to college and got a degree and everything, and became a counselor when I was 24.
Hmm.
And it was in some ways, I was trying to reconcile my own past with my family issues with substance abuse and such.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that it was just this constant trying to find out more. I mean, I've had quite a bit of chaos. I had a very difficult relationship when I was 17, and when my what actually led to my son being conceived.
Hmm.
And it was just it was always wanting more, always wanting to find answers. I couldn't explain why everything seemed so difficult for me, other than reading and writing and talking to people when there wasn't much at stake personally. I
Hmm.
think was I could always charm a person, talk to them, relate to them, as long as there wasn't like it didn't get turned back on me.
Hmm.
When
Hmm.
as soon as I started to have to convey who I was as a person, it faltered because I didn't really know who that was. I had
Hmm.
a complete blank there. I had my version of myself that I would like to portray to the world, but
Hmm.
internally I couldn't reconcile that with who I was and how I experienced it.
You write, you share about your profile, your neurodiversity, and your eventual diagnosis. What what led to that process?
Well, I went through a divorce in 2019, and I was homeless.
Mm,
And I actually was going through some very difficult times with suicidal ideation because I was homeless, and it
mhm,
was traumatic. I mean, it was the first time since I was a child that I'd experienced it,
mhm,
and it brought back a lot of those feelings of uncertainty and lack of stability and security.
mhm.
So I was institutionalized for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Um, and it was during that time that led to the diagnosis.
Mhm,
Um, Talking to people, and there was somebody who was autistic on the unit, and talking to them, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. I mean,
mhm,
like we have the same idiosyncrasies or flavors of idiosyncrasies, and that was
mhm.
what I went to the psychiatrist and was like, I think I just learned something big about myself,
Mhm, mhm.
and talked to them and went through the diagnosis with a psychologist on staff. So,
That's within the field of mental health. There's always this, well, hopefully, there is this conversation and this questioning of the difference between the importance of labels and the negative aspects of labels would stigmatize and other people, make them feel less than.
mhm,
And it's always been something that I've wrestled with as a practitioner, and as a person with my own neurodiversity and family with as well, and trying to hold that place, and ideally where the label is affirming and opens doors, and is this place of like, oh wow, okay, this makes sense. Not that there's something wrong with me, even though unfortunately some of these labels are couched in lots of disability, but rather than an understanding, and as we've been moving towards an acceptance of many profiles needed for many things in life.
right. Yeah. I definitely, I've been familiar with the discourse on trying, a lot of people seeking to um, skeed away from labels in terms
Hmm.
of mental health, and I, yeah, I was a counselor for a while, for about 6 years, and I was familiar,
Yes.
and I felt then, I was actually much more towards, hey, labels are more harmful than helpful in a lot of cases.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a you know shift in perspective when all of a sudden knowing this thing was like opening a door, and as you
Hmm.
said, finding illumination, and finally having context in so many areas of my life that I had felt alone and misunderstood, or completely not understood whatsoever. I mean, no attempts were made
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
many cases. So it was quite revelatory, and um, you know, it gave me a form of brilliance into my
Hmm.
mind, where,
Hmm.
not in terms of giftedness or whatever, in terms
Hmm.
of it let me see the world differently. It was a revelation.
Hmm. And understanding that and sounding like embracing that, here you go from, I mean, sounds like of the lowest lows of your adulthood, if
Right.
not even beyond, um, to intensive treatment, to a new diagnosis. What did this open up for you?
Well, okay, so I went to culinary school, like, way back before everything,
Yes.
and and I mostly because my grandma taught me how to cook when I was really young. I spent a lot of time with her summers and such. Um, and so I loved cooking. I loved the concept of cooking, at least. I liked the idea of food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was great on paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the early 2000s, and there was a lot of sauces was kind of a big thing. You had the squeeze bottles full of
Yeah.
all aiolis and all this other stuff, and they were completely not my thing. I cannot stand them like at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
They ruined food for me, and it's like I kept thinking if I could just push through it, I'd be able to expand upon all these food issues that I had, because when I was younger, before culinary school, there were so many things I wouldn't eat. I mean, far more than I would. But after culinary school, it opened up the ability for me to cook things the way that I wanted them,
Mm-hmm.
and learning, I can make this more crunchy if I do this. Like, if I am really careful about the temperature and double bread it, I can make it perfect. And um, so for me, it was, I can't make this as a career because I'm not going to be able to walk into a restaurant and say I can't cook this because I honestly can't taste it without throwing up.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. That's a good entryway to any new employment or food experience, right? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I that was when I went back to college.
Mm.
But
You pivoted. Yes.
yes. So I had this concept of, um, once I was diagnosed and I started talking, and I was talking to this other person who had who was autistic in the hospital, talking about food, and I was like, I never thought about my food issues in a broader sense.
Mm.
That, of course, I was familiar because my son, my son is now, he's turning 23.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Wow.
yeah,
You don't look old enough
I'm,
to
I'm
put it through.
41. So
Wow. Wow.
he was born when I was 18. So,
Yeah.
um, uh, but I was, very, I did my best with him because I had food issues also, but there was
Mm-hmm.
always this difficulty where, but I'll eat this. Why won't you eat this? And I couldn't get my mind around the fact that, at the time I wasn't thinking in terms of, oh, wait, this is a systemic, large, encompassing issue
Not just
that
you. Not
it's
just
not
you.
just me. Right.
Right.
Right. So, I did my best to accommodate him, but I admittedly fell short at times.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but I don't understand. It's just pasta. It's just
Right.
like plain pasta. It's the simplest thing in the world. It's so when I learned about my own diagnosis and my own perspective and learning more about that and what it means, I was like, you know what? First, it actually started with, I started writing. I got out of the hospital. I was living in a homeless shelter, and I started writing. Um, and at first, I was writing children's books, and I still write children's books, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
on submission with them. I write picture books and chapter books, and I largely write for people like myself. And initially, it was a story of my own childhood with homelessness, where I started to draw this flamingo, and when living in a shelter for battered women, and I started distributing this newsletter amongst the other kids, and I drew this silly flamingo, still the only thing I know how to draw, and named him Flannery,
Oh, of course.
and the kids loved it. I mean, it was horrible. It was basically this like ridiculous um, uh, comic, basically of Flannery being in difficult situations and making it out unscathed and getting out by the skin of his teeth. Pretty much, projective, hopeful thinking, I
Mm-hmm.
think. But when I was, in the homeless shelter, and it was a shelter that had a women's and children's section, so I would see these children playing on the playground, and I was like, I remember that, and I started thinking, no, children don't have books about this.
Mm.
There's children books with homelessness, and I did research and read a bunch, and there's a lot of them out there. A lot of it is transitory, or with sleep. There's some about sleeping in a car, or there's talking about homelessness tangentially, but there's
Mm-hmm.
not a lot from an actual homeless child's perspective.
Mm.
and especially not in shelters, which is the most common form of homelessness.
Right.
It's the so it's like, well, besides doubled up or living more families to a home.
Mm-hmm.
So I started writing a picture book about it and retelling it, and I started pitching my books from that shelter bed. Joined Twitter for a pitch event for DV Pit, which is a
Mm-hmm.
pitching event for people with disability or disadvantaged backgrounds. And I started the submission process and submitting to agents, and I started thinking, and I remember it because it was just like lighter. It was November 11th, or let's see, yeah, November 11th, 2020. I was thinking about why don't I write a cookbook? And the first cookbook I came up with was actually different. I came up with a cookbook that I was calling Bone Apple Tea. And it was about meme food. And I still think it's a great cookbook, and I really want to do it.
Yes.
I love the title, but I started submitting things, and I actually became a sensitivity reader, and I've actually done some writing on Very Well Family, and I started working as writing as business writing and business analytics, and I was doing other things at the time just to get my foot in the door, and I got a really quick following. I gathered 10,000 followers on Twitter in a little under a year. And I was doing my best to get out there. I was working on projects that really mattered. I was, later, like I was a sensitivity reader for, some pretty big books, and it was really special.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came up with the idea for Color, Taste, Texture, I remember thinking, this is going to sell like right away. Like
you knew.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew it. I'm like, this is something that's not done. And I did research. There was no books on picky eating or food aversion, especially. And especially, there were no books written from the perspective of the neurodivergent.
Right.
And everything I found was about tricking children or trying to get them to go outside of that. And I was like, that's not going to work. I know that's not going to work.
Right. As a person and as a parent, both does not work. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And coming from, from my degrees in behavioral science, I mean, it's not going to work. You can't do this. It's not going to work. I mean, there's a lot of hopeful thinking in it, but it's just not. So I started, really focusing on what I could do, and it was amazing because the book itself, I signed with a fiction agent. And I got offers for my fiction and my nonfiction in the same week after submitting for about a year and a couple of months, which is actually pretty remarkable to get offers. I mean. I don't know a lot of people are familiar with the literary world, but getting literary agent is very
it's challenging.
It's very challenging.
Lots of no's.
Yes. And getting two,
you're right,
and within a week for completely different fields.
Right.
Is like signing with the NFL and the
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, that's relevant right now. So I just have to say, because Deion Sanders, who used to play for the Atlanta Braves baseball and the Atlanta Falcons, is doing wonders at Colorado University, Buffalo. So he's one of the rare birds, like you, who gets signed by two different disciplines.
Right. Yes. And the journey for Color, Taste, Texture to having its day was, it went from concept to writing a proposal, which I'd never done before, because it's different than submitting a query for fiction, where you submit the whole work, rather than just an outline. This is what I want the work to be. It went from proposal to submitting to an agent to signing with an agent, fixing that proposal for submission, to getting an offer within about 6 months.
Wow. Yeah.
Which That's is ridiculously fast for for publishing, and not only just from any place, but literally my dream publisher, Avery, is has a lot of other neurodivergent authors. They have Steve Silberman, who wrote Neurotribes, is an author
Mm-hmm.
there. I mean, it
Yeah.
was like I've
Yes.
actually gotten to know him, and he's been
Oh, wow.
supportive of promoting
Wow.
my work. Um, and so it's like really it was the most ideal of scenarios.
Did your book do like when you had the idea, did it all just roll out for you, or was it the concept and then it just went from there?
It was all at once.
Yeah.
I had everything in my mind, what I knew the book would to be, the moment that I came up with it.
Hmm.
I have the post. I did a proposal on Twitter, the app formerly known as Twitter, I suppose.
Yes.
Um, on November 11th, I put out a proposal for it. I'm like, I'm querying color, taste, texture. I called it, recipes for, um, was it autistic and picky
Mm-hmm.
eaters. I can't remember
Mm-hmm.
exactly how I worded the tagline to it at the time, which is the only thing that changed of the title. Oh,
Wow.
and I had "and" in the title, color, taste, and texture
Mm.
initially,
Right. Now
and
it's just
then
color, taste, texture.
right, kind of
Yep.
following on acid, fat,
Yeah.
heat, and
Mm-hmm.
some of the other baking or cookbook trends. Um, and so it was remarkable, and I remember thinking, because I'm sitting there, and there's actually a moment of sadness at first, because I'm like, I know this book is going to be so helpful, and I know it's going to be important. I know people are going to love it, but I'd started as a kidlit writer,
Mm.
and I was like, people are like this is going to sell, and then I'm only going to be known as the guy who wrote Color Taste Texture. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what? That's actually fine. The more I sat with it, and was like, this is
Mm-hmm.
actually a really impactful book. And when I pitched it, and I started hearing people back, like potential readers, people who could use it, saying, "This is," like crying, like, "This is a godsend. This is what I've needed my whole life." And
Mm.
I started sitting with that, and realizing the importance of it, the significance of what I was
Mm-hmm.
doing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
that's when it started to be less important that I may not be known for
Mm-hmm.
Alan and Flannery the Flamingo before.
Before, or this just might help the flamingo Flannery get out there even more. You know how these things become, they work off of each other.
That's the hope.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's it was amazing. I actually the cookbook was just it. Initially I had it written as a much larger work, and it
Mm.
was meant to be a much more comprehensive text with a structured, formalized approach towards, if a child or somebody does want to try new foods, here's how you could do it. And I
Mm-hmm.
do have that for a follow up for the next book that will be
Nice.
proposing,
Nice. Nice.
and 100 more recipes.
Right. Excellent.
And it's called the Explorer's plate. So I think it'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it uses a branching table of if you like this, here are three things similar in texture, flavor, or appearance that you could try along with it. And
Yeah. It's and I see and sense your 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 behaviorism, human behavior analysis coming in, because this does become, it can become very clinical. That's not the right word, but right. It's like you have to understand human behavior and the behavior of your child to really set this up for success. And
right,
for example, um, what was new to me was about the impact of actual color. I mean, I knew about textures, and of course, I knew about uh, taste, but that the taste and the texture could be right, but if the color of the food is wrong, that can be completely sensory overwhelming, and then you would have avoidance.
exactly. And there's other environmental factors that can play a part, and it couldn't fit the whole everything that's in the book in the title, unfortunately.
Hmm.
It can be color, taste, texture, plating, environment.
Yeah, right, right. The chapters, though, the chapters hit it.
Yes,
Everyone,
the
when you
chapter.
get into the book, it's all there. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was very much a, um, for me, I mean, beige foods are like my it thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I feel comfort. Being a Midwest child, I think that was, yellow and beige are my babies. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is perfect. It's the color of the sun. um, so when I have, um, the length of the book was dictated by the publisher, who had, it has to be of a size. The book
Mm-hmm.
has to basically, you know um, be relatively the same size of other trade paperbacks that they publish.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went from being a, um, you know 80,000 to 90,000 word project. Was They're like, we really needed to be around 50,000, 40,000. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, okay,
Right.
okay. So I'd already written most of the book. And
Yes. And most of the second book, it turns out, right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, and we also, it has to be like, between 30 and 40 pictures. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, this was meant to be like a step by step, like, okay, here's how to cut an onion so that you
Yes.
could cook it so that the texture is innocuous. But
Right.
suddenly I couldn't have those process shots or
Right.
the more granular stuff.
Right.
So I had to restructure essentially the whole thing. It became an
Mm-hmm.
entirely different project. But I think it really went well because the book is a lot more accessible at this point.
You just helped me with the word I was looking for before. It wasn't clinical as much as technical. So I
Right.
could see how you would be writing more of a technical cookbook because all of these things really, really matter. And when I hold this book, everyone, which you have to check out, I mean, it's the texture of the book is just feels so good. The pictures are, you want to eat the pictures. They're so, it's everything looks so good. And yet it is very, it's, you are in this book, right? So you write about your experiences, prefaces when you talk about the different, the environment, you talk about taste, you talk about texture, you talk about color, and it is completely user friendly and approachable, right? It's not for someone to say, oh, wow, this is overwhelming. My experience was it just invites you in and makes you say like, oh, I could do this. And
Right.
this makes a lot of sense. I mean, also we have had 3 picky eaters. Um, And yes, this would have been really, really helpful, not only to try these things out, but then to include the kids on making these and experimenting with you of how does this look? How does this taste? How does this feel? To have a vocabulary to describe the no, right? Or just
Right.
the shrug or the just turn around and walk away response.
Right. I had um, to give an idea of just how accessible it is at this point. I had the most remarkable. I cried. Promotion for it from a follower on Twitter whose daughter, who was just starting kindergarten, spent 15 minutes reading the book, and on the first day of class included color, taste, texture in their
Mm.
reading diary,
Oh, wow. Wow.
and talking about how, this includes ways that maybe foods I haven't liked before I can like.
Mm. Mm.
And I cried because, like,
Yeah.
it was just a moment of, it was really a connection between, my kidlit world
Right.
and
Yes.
my cookbook world. It's like, and ideally I wanted to make it as something that children could read with their parents, or that could be read along with and that could be followed. And I tried to make it as accessible to all ages, not just in terms of content and what it could do,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of could be read by. um
Yes, and it is more than a cookbook. It is also education, right? It's education to the parent. It's education to the child who learns about themselves through you as now a world famous chef and author, right? When you have these people who have done something that one looks up to, it's inspiration, right? It
right.
expands other people's ideas about themselves. Like, right, if he could do that, and I can do this, I can try this. I
Right.
can I can have some control over my environment. Like, I communicate what I like and don't like. And as you write, and your experience and so many others, when there's not a vocabulary, it's you're just seen as like obstinate, lazy, difficult. Like, even right, even you with your son, like, this is pasta. Like, come on,
Right.
how hard could this be? But it really is. Food aversion and sensory issues are really they're the invisible, like the invisible culprit to so much of this behavior that then becomes conflict around food and the table.
And that leads to my number one goal. The one thing that matters more than anything to me about this book is that food aversion is okay.
Right.
It's not a defect. It doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make you a bad person or a bad child or anything. It's not a judgment. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it is there's a biological, a neurological component to it, and I try to describe that in, there's if what you're eating, your brain is telling you is dangerous or wrong. You, I mean, a lot of the before culinary standards became practice, and food safety became there was it was a lot of trial and error. And sometimes if you bite into something and you're expecting it to be something and it's not, your brain is yelling at you at that point, saying, not safe, not safe. And for people with sensory issues or people who are autistic or have any kind of sensitivities with this, that signal is a lot louder and you
Mm-hmm.
can't be blocked out. You can't. It's much more difficult to stop it. You can't stop that constant dialogue between what you're experiencing and what you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, so your food becomes a threat. And here you have, a loved one who's trying to get you to eat. They may have the best of intentions, but they're telling you to ignore what your brain is telling you could potentially be dangerous to you
Right. Right.
without having that language to explain it.
Right. And this is where it turns into behavior with literally the fight and flight response
Right.
happens at the table during eating time with many kids. And again,
Yeah.
it's just seen as disobedience,
Right.
oppositional behavior. And it really comes from a place of anxiety and a really primitive survival response.
Right. um, and and honoring that. And I've
Mm-hmm.
had people, in the book I include a profile where you can list a child or a person's, and I say person, children are people also. I mean, an
Yes.
adult, where you
Yes.
can list a person's safe foods and off limit foods and all these things. And I've had people ask me before, like, what do we do if I send this to grandma
Mm-hmm.
and they're cooking for them, and they're what if they don't honor that?
Right.
I'm like, well, of course, we can't tell our grandparents how to treat our children.
Right.
It won't go well. Usually there's always going to be some form of conflict there.
Mm-hmm.
um, but the important thing is, if you develop this list with your child and they know that you have their agency at heart, that you
Mm-hmm.
actually are doing the best to honor and respect their requests and wishes, that
Mm-hmm.
even if grandma or aunt or an uncle or something else isn't necessarily as receptive to preparing for that, that child knows they have a safe place to fall.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
that's just
Mm-hmm.
out there. At home, it's okay. You're safe. You can. I respect your desires. Respect your needs,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of difference.
Huge. Huge.
Yeah.
Because as I'm hearing you, what I'm thinking is acceptance with a big A, it leads to empowerment, right? If I feel accepted, I feel more empowered to make choices, to communicate my choices, knowing that in this environment, if I don't have much choice, like you're saying, I know at home I have my safe place. I just have to deal with this situation,
Right.
as opposed to everything feeling threatening and feeling misunderstood.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, that was. I also did my best to, accommodate all kinds of people. I include a non-speaking feedback template.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a non-speaking child or person that you're preparing food for, and there's something about it that doesn't sit well with them, they can show you what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's this. It's the texture, and then you can work through it and communicate in their way, to find out exactly how you can make it better for them. Um,
There's a ton of well, it's not only information, but like you said, this like a worksheet or a template, and everything is laid out. There's so many visuals, and broken down by, is this easy, is this beginners, and
right.
m- a vast majority of the meals are for all of us 101 type chefs, right? Like they're
Right.
really set up for to be accessible to everyone to cook.
Right. It was really important to me that this not be like, I'm not trying to show off. I'm not trying to,
Hmm.
I'm trying to, the recipes that are included in the book are largely things I eat. There's only one recipe in there I won't eat, but
Which one is that one?
it's the vegan stuffed focaccia
Okay.
because I don't like mushrooms.
Okay. Fair. Okay.
But I know that the recipe is good because I made it, and everybody who had it was funny because I remember at the time I was preparing it and I was like, this is going to be really popular. Like, this is a really good recipe. I know it's a good recipe, and I just know that people are going to love it and it's going to be with me forever. And it's like the one thing I won't eat. And that's actually it. Pretty much turned out that way. We had everybody on set who had it was like, this is delicious. This is so good.
Hmm.
I'm like, of course.
Yes.
And it was
You
it's
just need to like mushrooms to enjoy it. That's
right.
just the one caveat. You can't have something for everyone, or
Right.
everything is not for everyone. There is something for everyone.
Right. And I tried to, include gluten-free recipes and, vegan, and most of the recipes, at least two-thirds, are either vegetarian or can be altered for a vegetarian.
Hmm.
Um, so,
Hmm.
I mean, I tried to include all of the favorites that you would have, but also make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Hmm.
Had some people be like, "Well, I wish it was all vegetarian or all vegan." I'm like, "Well, not all children are vegan or vegetarian." And when you're already dealing with a limited palette of what someone could
Right.
eat,
Right.
can't restrict that further.
Oh, but I'm sensing further books that are targeted towards different types of recipes towards different types of eaters. Like
Yes,
this is just the beginning. This is
I
like a chicken book for the soul. Like this is just the beginning of tasting for the sensitive palate.
I really hope so. And I've got two proposals that I'm working on for follow up. One is special interest kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
which has 11 core multi-port recipes, like eggs Benedict, which has the biscuits, poached eggs, hollandaise sauce, things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yes, I do.
And it goes into also explaining the science of why you do what you do,
Mm,
and it goes through 12 different recipes that could teach nearly every necessary culinary technique in the kitchen.
mm,
So steaming, braising, you have all these different things, all, and so that these recipes that are not included in color taste texture, I don't want to have repeats.
mm,
They each not only teach the science, the whys, the hows, but it also teaches, and it's accessible to children, so children can learn how to cook.
mm. I just had a vision of you opening the door for a whole new generation of food averse chefs, right?
Right,
Like you would never think, right? Like when it's something that you just don't like, that you would actually lean into that and
right.
further develop and expand the discipline. So
Uh,
cool.
Thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. because that is the hope, that is the dream.
Mm-hmm. Well, your mission, which you have succeeded, I just want to say that for everyone as we wind down here. Your mission, as you state, is to encourage acceptance of food aversion, remove the stress around the dinner table, and make eating as much of a joyful and enjoyable experience as possible. And we all know the dinner table, any table, but often we think about the dinner table and the family dinners, this ideal of getting together and gathering at least a few times a week. It is the place of special connection, and it is also the space of potential tremendous conflict for a variety of reasons
Right.
when you're raising a family. So to take food out, to possibly take the stress of food out of that equation is huge.
Thank you. I it's I'm very proud of the book, and um, I really hope that it gets in as many hands of the people who need it. So,
Yes, yes. Well, we're helping. We're going to help here, Matthew.
yay!
Okay, so it's time for the parent footprint moment question. Here we go.
Yes.
Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your child, and or those you love.
I think it definitely ties back to when I was diagnosed, because it put my experiences both as a child and as a parent into stark contrast. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it made everything brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was why I included in the acknowledgments to my son Ian,
Yes.
that I'm sorry he wasn't more understanding about the watermelon, because he can't stand watermelon, and it's like my favorite fruit. So um, I really wish, in some ways I wish that I had known sooner, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I could have been a better parent in that
Mm-hmm.
regard.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't change the past. We can only, acknowledge it, and try to move forward.
Yes.
Um, and I feel that that revelation, um, as myself as autistic, was what led me to become hopefully a better parent, at least
Mm-hmm.
a more understanding one. Even though his differences or neurotype are not the same as my own,
Mm-hmm.
it helped me. Sorry, it helped me understand um, myself as a parent.
Yeah.
Why was this my approach? Why
Mm-hmm.
was this difficult for me? Or um, how could have I done differently? But how can I make amends now, as a
Right.
person seeking to say, look, I understand now, I get it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in the
Mm-hmm.
wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and I should have acknowledged that your differences, and how you want different things and everything, you know, is completely acceptable and okay and beautiful, even, because we're different people, and that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to churn out carbon copies of ourselves. Um,
No, and it doesn't work even if you try.
exactly. And so that was definitely
Mm-hmm.
my moment.
Thank thank you for sharing. I also hear in your response um, hints of your past substance abuse counseling experience, and of course, as a Buddhist practitioner, is for all of us to remember that the past is the past, and it is important to acknowledge and honor the past, but we need to be present focused with life now, because living in that past is often just painful and takes us away from our present
Right.
and therefore our future that's yet to come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And going into the future, um, aware and accepting,
Hmm.
and not just accepting, but appreciating the differences and the beauty, and that's what makes life better for everyone.
Well, nothing more can be said better. So that we have to end on that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Matthew. Please, um, congratulations again. Congratulations on this beautiful book and the success. And for those listening, we get these pings every once in a while, and we got to listen to them. You got this thing came to you, and it came strong, and you knew you just had to move forward with it. And again, inspiration for all of us. When you have these ideas and something seems important, trust yourself, trust your intuition, trust your instincts. Tell everyone where they can get this life-changing book.
Color, Taste, Texture is available in all booksellers. Barnes and Noble, for those across the pond, Blackwell's, there's Amazon. It's everywhere out there. And I really hope that you give it a chance, because, I think it can make a difference. So thank you.
Yes. And I hope we can do this again with the next iteration and continue the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. I know you are thinking of people that need to listen to this conversation. Please share this with them. Please invite them into our amazing community. We appreciate your 5-star reviews. They really, really matter and make a difference. Do your best to be that person you want your child to become, and ask yourself the guiding question I ask myself each day: what footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummerman, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast, and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.